Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming today. We have the distinct pleasure of having the Maryland Emergency Management Agency here with us, Mr. Ed McDonough. Mr. McDonough has been with the Maryland Emergency Management Agency since 2003. Prior to that, he was with the Maryland Department of Housing and Urban Development, where he was a Public Information Officer there. And he attended the Public Information Officer and Technology course at Oak Ridge, Tennessee. He comes to us today as the Maryland Emergency Management Agency's Public Information Officer. And those of you who don't know a little bit about the Maryland Emergency Management Agency, MEMA, they handle and coordinate all the services with regards to major disasters here in Maryland. They're located up in Camp Frederick, Maryland. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. McDonough. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm here today to give you some tips on how you can make yourself, your family, and your home, and even a little few tips for your car. That's something we don't always think about, but if you remember the rush hour snowstorm back in 2011, January of 2011, you may remember some people had commutes of up to 12 or 13 hours to get home. We hope not to replicate that, but that was a great lesson for having some extra energy bars, some extra drinks, whatever, in your car for the ride home. Okay, so some of the types of hazards we face in Maryland: hurricanes, floods, thunder and lightning, winter storms, as we remember, earthquakes. We suddenly got reminded of that back in August of 2011. We were preparing for a hurricane at that point in time, and all of a sudden the earth started shaking, so we had to go back to the drawing board. I actually went to the website of my counterpart agency in California as soon as we were allowed to go back in our building and pulled up some earthquake preparedness tips from them. I wasn't going to try and reinvent that wheel, and we'll actually touch a little bit about some things to do to get prepared for earthquakes. We don't have them, obviously, the size and scope that they do down in California, but we have learned that was a wake-up call for us on the East Coast to be prepared. Tornadoes, heat and drought. We don't mention anything about domestic issues, active shooters. That could be a whole separate set of training, but just remember that some of the things that we teach you here for being prepared for these events could also help you if, for example, the building were locked down for an extended period of time because of some other type of incident. So we try and take this from an all hazards approach. Family plan, emergency supply kit, listen for alerts. Go to, if you hear a siren or if there's a warning siren that goes off or you're instructed to do so, you can go to any of the TV stations in whatever market you're in, Baltimore, D.C. Also, you can listen to news radio, WBAL in Baltimore, or WTOP or WNEW down in the D.C. area. They all will provide very good, timely information if, God forbid, we ever have a real serious event. Try and keep your vehicles fueled. That was another lesson learned by a lot of people when their commutes home took 2 or 3 times longer than normal back in that rush hour snowstorm back in 2011. Hurricanes. Now, we get a lot of what we call remnants of hurricanes. By the time they get up here, they're usually tropical storms. One of the most damaging, in fact, the most damaging in my lifetime, although I was much younger then, was back in 72 when Hurricane Agnes hit. And that actually hit the United States off the coast of Florida as a relatively minor Category 1 hurricane. It came up through the panhandle of Florida, kind of meandered up through the Carolinas as a tropical storm, went back out to sea, and then came back in over the Delaware area and kind of parked itself up in central Pennsylvania and south central New York for a while, and just dumped incredible amounts of rain over an area, over basically the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And they had a lot of issues with the Conowingo rising. More locally, we had a lot of flooding in not too far from here in the Ellicott City, Oella areas. A lot of flooding in Frederick, more inland issues. Hurricane Isabel, fast forward to 2003, 2 weeks after I started working at MEMA. Hurricane Isabel was more of a coastal flooding event, so more of the issues there were along eastern Baltimore County, Anne Arundel County, over along the eastern shore, parts of Harford County. So where the storm hits may depend on what kind of hazards you face. But they're tropical storms that have a sustained wind of greater than 75 miles an hour. Now again, by the time they get to us, they're usually not that strong. They're usually a remnant or very much downgraded from that. Storm surge can increase sea level along the coast. One of the things, again, we learned during Isabel back in 2003 is all of the models that the National Weather Service had historically put together for what would happen to storm surge along the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries for a storm the size of Hurricane Isabel, they were underestimated by about 25 to 30%. So whereas they were predicting maybe a 9-foot storm surge, that is, the water would go 9 feet above mean high tide, it wound up going 12 to 14 feet above mean high tide. And if you live very close to a coastal area, that's a big difference in whether your home's getting flood damage or not. Strongest hurricanes are Category 5s, winds in excess of 155 miles an hour, storm surge in excess of 20 feet. Now, we typically didn't think in this part of the country that we would get hit with anything really strong like what they call a major storm, Categories 3, 4, or 5. We typically got the remnants up here or Category 1 or 2. Sandy kind of changed our thinking on that because Sandy followed the model that we didn't really expect to happen. It was a very strong storm, Category 3, I believe, when it made landfall, though it had been Category 5 when it was wandering out in the ocean. And it came up along the coast, and it did something that tropical storms don't usually do. It made a hard left turn. Usually it will veer up. Typically, we get the remnants of a storm that comes up either around the Outer Banks or around Virginia Beach, and it's over land for a while before it gets to us. Sandy went, fortunately, about 50 or 60 miles north of Ocean City, made the hard left into southern New Jersey, and so while we did get a good bit of damage here, it really, obviously, as you recall, devastated central New Jersey on up to New York State and up into Connecticut and even somewhat up into Rhode Island along the coastal areas there. So that kind of broke some of the rules for hurricanes hitting this far north. The Atlantic hurricane season runs from June 1 to November 30th. We are right now hitting the end of what is normally the peak time for us to get hit in this area. Agnes was unusual. It hit in June. We don't usually get much in this area in June. They tend to be much farther south or maybe toward the Gulf Coast. We tend to have our prime season here in the September area. Knock on wood, this has been a very, very mild hurricane season. It only takes one, and Sandy was very late in the year. It was actually around Halloween when it hit. In fact, you may recall that when Sandy hit and was flooding areas of our eastern shore and then going up and doing its thing in New York and New Jersey, it was helping to dump about 3 feet of snow out in western Maryland and parts of neighboring West Virginia. Because of the time of year it hit, there was a cold front coming through. At the same time, it was coming up the coast. And so we had a major snow event in the western part of the state. It made for some interesting logistical issues for us. But again, we still have another good solid month of potential hurricane weather. So hurricanes, we see the hurricane destruction that we saw along the coast of New Jersey or along the Gulf Coast as we've seen in years past. We typically don't get that here. Now, Sandy showed us that Ocean City and the Delaware beaches could get ravaged like that if that storm had made a hard left about 50 or 60 miles sooner. Knock on wood, it didn't. But in this area, when we get the remnants, most of the things that we're going to get are, it can spawn tornadoes, particularly if there's cold air merging with the tropical air. Flooding is obviously something that we can get. We talked about Agnes. We talked about Isabel a little bit with Sandy on the eastern shore. Flash floods because of heavy rain. That was Agnes's thing. It caused a lot of flash floods in central Maryland. Hail, if it's a strong enough type of thunderstorm, and lightning. So those are more typical of the things we get in this part of the state. If you're down on the lower eastern shore, or if you were down at the Outer Banks, or elsewhere along the beach during these storms, you could get the heavy storm surge and the really heavy winds. We typically, fortunately, don't get that here. So what can you do before a hurricane hits? Well, and again, we'll be talking about other types of disasters, but some of these things are going to be valuable even if you're getting a severe thunderstorm coming through. Plan to secure your property. Nothing worse than seeing all your good patio furniture blowing around outside in bad storm, or having your patio furniture crash into your sliding glass doors and destroying them too. You strap or clip things to your structure if you need to. Make sure your trees and shrubs are well trimmed. Make sure your rain gutters and downspouts are cleared. Make sure if you have storm drains in front of your house on the street, help your local public works folks out. Make sure they're not clogged. Whoop, got a little bit ahead of myself there. Okay. There we go. Okay. Again, anchor the outdoor objects. Listen to radio and TV for information. I can't stress enough, particularly in the Baltimore market, also in the D.C. market, but particularly in the Baltimore market, all 4 TV stations are outstanding about providing information. Now, you can argue that particularly during snowstorms, they incite the bread, milk, and toilet paper panic, and that may be true. But in terms of serious information and letting people know what's going on and where the damage is and what you can do to prepare yourselves, we consider the media to be a very important partner with us in getting that information out. And I do have to give credit where credit is due. They do a lot of good work, and they will suspend programming for long periods of time to help the public understand what's going on and what they need to do to protect themselves and what we in government, state, local, and federal, are trying to do to protect them. And check your emergency supplies. Again, do this before the hurricane. Make sure you have a good supply kit. And there are plenty of places to go to get information about what should be in that kit. Make sure your car is fueled. Again, a lot of these can be for almost any type of event. If you're told to turn off your utilities, do so. That is rare. One of the important things, if you have natural gas coming into your home from BGE, or if you live down near DC, Pepco, or whoever, know how to shut it off, know where the shutoff is, and make sure you have the proper wrench to shut it off. Because sometimes, not just for a hurricane, but sometimes that can be very important. Turn your refrigerator to the coldest setting, your freezer too, if you have a separate freezer. That way, you'll get the stuff really cold in there. If you lose power for a period of time, it will stay longer. And then open and close it as little as possible if you do lose power. If you have a propane tank providing your natural gas, turn that off. Only use your phone for serious emergencies. Let me mention real quickly here, too, about cell phones and iPads and things like that. Everything in your power to keep them charged. I know even in day-to-day living, it's hard to remember to keep my cell phone charged enough. But particularly if you know some sort of bad event is coming where you may lose power, keep your cell phones and your iPads charged as much as possible. Have a backup battery in addition to that if possible, because that way, if you do lose power for an extended period of time, even if you don't have your TV or your landline phone or whatever, you still may have some other way to monitor what's going on with news or radio broadcasts. Store drinking water and water for sanitary purposes. They suggest 3 gallons per person per day. If you have a big family, that can be a daunting amount of water to store. But at least try and think of what you would need for drinking and cooking, and at least to get the toilet flushed. And remember, what you use for the toilet doesn't necessarily have to be clean, fresh, clean water, okay? But just keep those things in mind. During a warning, okay, keep listening for official instructions. We will, at MEMA, we will work with the media, and local emergency managers for localized events will work with the media to get the proper information out about what you should be doing. Try and store your valuables and personal papers in a waterproof container and keep them where you can find them. Sometimes you may have it in a safe that's fireproof, but maybe not waterproof. Sometimes you may have it in a safe and you can't find the key in a disaster. Try and make sure you know where they are. In fact, I would suggest keeping copies of them handy and keeping originals off-site if you can. If you have a safe deposit box, or maybe a friend or a relative in an area that's not subject to some of the same types of disasters we are, just keep backup copies of your important insurance documents, birth certificates, photocopy of your driver's license, all those types of things. Avoid elevators if you're in a high building. Stay inside, away from windows, skylights, and glass doors. Now, again, we don't get that kind of wind up here usually, although I would say if we had a tornado warning, that would be one of the big things we would suggest. Excuse me, I've been fighting a cold for the last couple of days. I got school-age kids, and you know how that goes. It just keeps cycling through the family. Keep a supply of flashlights and extra batteries. I actually saw in a disaster preparedness magazine called Disaster Recovery Journal. It's geared toward the business community. And they talked about people using candles when their power's out. I don't know where he got that from, but please don't use candles when the power's out. I know Yankee candles smell nice, and that's wonderful, but try not to use anything with a flame during a power outage, because it could accidentally get knocked over, and then you've multiplied the problem that you already have. And then if the power is lost, turn off your appliances to reduce the surge. Now, obviously, you're going to want to keep your certain things on, but certainly computers, TVs, stuff like that. If you can't use them anyway, it's no sense keeping them on. You can keep a couple of lights flipped on so you know when the power comes back on, but any kind of major appliances, try and turn them off. Floods. Again, this could happen as part of a hurricane, but this is probably, this and severe thunderstorms are probably the two biggest hazards that we face in Maryland. And there are several different kinds of flooding. Flash flooding is what happens if you have a stream near your home and we get a very heavy downpour with, let's say, a heavy summer shower coming through in a short period of time. That is when we get typically what we call flash flood or urban or stream flooding. Okay, that will come very quickly. General flooding is more of a prolonged steady rain, 2 or 3 days where it rains a lot, maybe not any real heavy rain, but steady rain over a long period of time, particularly if the ground's already saturated. And again, this can affect larger streams and rivers. Major river flooding, and around here we tend to look at the Susquehanna and the Potomac. And again, if you remember back to Agnes in 72, a lot of the flooding on the Susquehanna was not caused by the rain that was hitting Maryland. It was caused by the rain way upstream in New York State and Pennsylvania. And that was several days after the rain hit here. So communities in Harford and Cecil County, Port Deposit and Havre de Grace in particular, had to deal with more flooding several days after the initial flooding around here because the watershed for the Susquehanna was all draining into the river and backing up behind the Conowingo Dam. And to release the pressure on the dam, they had to open quite a few floodgates, and that creates issues in Port Deposit and Havre de Grace a few miles downstream. And then, of course, hurricanes and tropical storms create storm surge in the bay and its tributaries, and then if you live on the coast, it could create some very serious storm surge along the ocean. So before a flood, make sure your insurance policy covers flooding. I can tell you your regular homeowner's insurance does not cover flooding. The insurance carriers got out of the flood insurance business back in the 70s because they could not spread the risk around to enough homes that were not impacted by flooding. One of the problems with flood insurance is the only people who really have to pay for it are the people who are most affected by it. So it's hard to spread the risk around. So if you are in a flood zone, potential flood zone, the rates are not inexpensive. I would also argue, though, that if you're not in an immediate flood zone, you could still use flood insurance because let's say you have localized heavy rain and your sump pump stops working. Okay? If you get that localized heavy rain and it starts coming up for your sump pump, that's still, if it's not a failure of the sump pump, if it's just the power's out, that's still considered a flooding event by your insurance carrier. Okay, so it's not a bad idea to have flood insurance, you know, if you don't live in a particularly strong flood zone. Flood insurance is inexpensive if you're not in a regular flood zone, and it's good backup protection. The problem with flood insurance is you can't wait till the hurricane is a few days away and say, oh, I better get flood insurance. You have to buy it 30 days in advance. You have to pay for it up front. Many of us probably, like me, are homeowners paid in monthly installments. You can't do that with flood insurance. You do have to pay it all up front. Unless it's a brand new home, it has to be in effect for 30 days before the storm hits for you to be able to collect on it. Move furniture and valuables to higher floors. That's, again, if your lower floors are susceptible to flooding. Port Deposit along the Susquehanna up in Cecil County, they do this regularly when they know they get it worse than Havre de Grace, which is on the Harford County side. They know that if the power company that runs Conowingo Dam has to release X amounts of gates, that they will get flooding up to a certain level. They have actually gotten it down to a science so much that they move all the furniture, all the important belongings up out of harm's way, and then they move themselves up to the highest floor out of harm's way and start having a party. That's how they deal with it up in Port Deposit. So, move that stuff up to a higher level. Keep your vehicles fueled in case you have to evacuate, and stay informed about weather conditions. Thunder and lightning. This is probably the most common thing that we're hit with around here. Most of it is not a terrible problem, but lightning can always be deadly, and thunderstorms can be a precursor to tornadoes. So again, you may get power outages, lightning, heavy rains, hail, wind, and again, tornadoes can be spawned from thunder and lightning. So again, follow the weather forecast closely. If you wake up that day and you hear on the news that there's a severe thunderstorm watch for the area, that means keep your ear cocked to the radio or, if you can, TV or whatever source you have for news. Excuse me. If it turns to a warning, that's where in the area that you're at, then that's where you need to take some serious action. Watch for signs of approaching storms. keep that battery-operated radio handy, or an alternate is a crank-powered radio where you can crank it up and it will run for a while off the crank energy. Postpone outdoor activities. I used to be a youth sports coach, and it used to frustrate people a lot, but because of me being in the business I'm in, if I saw, no matter how far away the lightning was, when I saw it, I would tell whoever was running that game, umpire, referee, whatever, you either temporarily suspend this game now and get people out of harm's way, or I'm taking my team and leaving. It's not worth anybody getting hurt over. And then again, same as you would for losing power, unplug some of your key electronic equipment to keep it from getting storm surge damage. So this segues into power outages. Very common in Maryland, although again, knock on wood, we haven't had too much the last year or two. But there was a stretch there from 2011 to late 2012. Irene, Sandy, Derecho, a bunch of other thunderstorm issues coming through, some winter storms in there. We were losing power outages into the 6 digits, 100,000 or more around Maryland on a fairly regular basis. Again, been lucky now lately, not so much. Again, caused by hurricanes, summer storms, high winds, winter storms, falling trees, traffic accidents, animals and transformers. I used to live up in Carroll County, since moved back down to the Baltimore area, but when I lived up in Carroll County, up in Taneytown, twice in the 30 years I lived there, we lost our power in the town of Taneytown because the Potomac Edison substation there, a squirrel got in it. The squirrel did not survive, sadly, but we also, a couple of thousand customers lost power for an hour or two because of that. It's fairly easy to fix, but it's a pain and it's an inconvenience. And again, it can last from a few moments to as long as the longest we've had in this area after the Derecho and Isabel, I guess. We had some people that I know that were without power for up to 8 days. So while you don't necessarily have to plan for being without that long, just think of the inconvenience if you were without power that long. And even worse if you have devices that you need for your health, dialysis and things along those lines. Oxygen, another big issue. So when the power goes out, if the power is off for less than 4 hours, the food in your refrigerator and freezer will be safe to eat. For a half-full freezer, about 24 hours. A completely full freezer, maybe 2 days. That's assuming you don't open the doors too much. That's not the time for your teenage kid to open the door and say, what am I in the mood for? Make sure they know what they want, get it in, get it out quickly, and get it shut again. Okay, water. Your water delivery system may not be working. If you live in a rural area and depend on well water, you're really in trouble unless you have a generator. And people who live in rural areas can certainly attest to that. But even if you live in a municipality, if the water treatment plant becomes offline because of power issues or whatnot, that could be another reason why water may not be available. Monitor your body temperatures if it's extremely cold or extremely hot. When the Derecho hit, typically when we get power outages, it's when a thunderstorm comes through followed by a cold front. So it's usually not too bad. It usually cools down maybe into the 80s, but with low humidity. So you can survive in that. Open the windows. Even if you don't have an air conditioner or a fan, you can still survive in that. But after the Derecho, it was in the 90s and low hundreds for the next 6 or 7 days. High humidity and no power for, hundreds of thousands of customers around Maryland. That clearly was a serious life safety issue. Avoid touching down power lines. You would think that's obvious, but every once in a while we still hear of someone doing it. And again, have access to flashlights with extra batteries. And again, keep your devices charged because, you may not know when a thunderstorm comes up and knocks out your power. You may not know when there's a traffic accident, down the country road where the transformer or the main transmission line to your subdivision is. So always try and keep your iPad, your cell phone, your smartphone, whatever, try and keep them charged as much as you can. Winter storms, snow, blizzards, and the worst of all, in my opinion, ice storms. I will take a 30-inch snowstorm over a quarter-inch of freezing rain or ice anytime, as a driver and also in the emergency management business. So again, there are winter storm watches where the conditions are ripe that day or in the days ahead for a winter storm to develop. And then there's a winter storm warning where some sort of, freezing rain, sleet, or snow event is imminent. Know the difference between the watch and the warning, and then blizzard warning, which also would accompany strong winds and make it extremely dangerous from a hypothermia point of view, in addition to all the other issues you'd be dealing with. Primary concern during winter storms, potential loss of power, heat, and telephone service. So again, keep those supplies stored, food, water, medications, first aid supplies, any pet, child, or elderly. I don't have elderly on here. Elderly supplies, anything special that people would need. Anybody that has any kind of disabilities, whether it be mobility issues, whether it be hearing impairment, whether it be vision impairment, make sure they have access to the things that they need, if that is. And then heating, fuel, if you have fuel delivered, if you have, if you're not hooked up to a delivery system like BG&E would have. Again, this is the storm map from, I believe, the February storm last winter. Earthquakes, again, not very common around here, but we got our wake-up call a few years ago. We have had several minor quakes. Now, these are some of the things you would do, definitely if you lived in California and other areas out west, but they're not bad things to think about now. Certainly secure things to your walls, keep heavy things lower to the ground and not very high up if you can. For heavy items, move them away from places where people would sit. Now that's kind of tough because a lot of people like to have mirrors and stuff over their couch, but just be cognizant of that. If you feel things happening, just try and get away. What we tell people is get under a sturdy table or a sturdy desk. One of the things we learned when the earthquake hit back in 2011 was we saw all these pictures of people from downtown Baltimore and D.C. flooding out of their businesses into the middle of the street, which is absolutely the wrong thing to do. If you're in an area with high buildings, you don't want to go out in the middle of the street because there's all sorts of stuff that could fall from the buildings, whether it could be brick or other sheathing from the building or windows or whatever. So you definitely don't want to do that, particularly in a high-rise. Now, we work in a one-story building, and I have to admit, and it hit during a workday, we were not prepared for what to do in an earthquake either. We did the same thing everybody else did. The difference was with a one-story building, we were about 50 feet away from our building, so there was no debris that could fall on us when we met out there. But in theory, you should get under a desk or under a sturdy table if anything happens. And, again, try to be away from any heavy stuff that might fall down. Tornadoes. We usually get several tornadoes or tornado warnings a year. If you ever listen to or watch the news on Fox 45 in the evening and there's a tornado warning in the area, you will probably hear my voice there. Their news producers have me on speed dial, and anytime there's a tornado warning in the metro area, as soon as the warning is broadcast, I'll get a call from them. And the first question they'll ask is, have you gotten any damage reports yet? And I avoid the desire to want to be a real smart aleck and say, well, of course not, it just hit. And I go, no, we're monitoring, we're keeping in touch with local officials, but we don't know of anything yet. But more importantly, it gives me a chance to tell people in the path of that storm, and typically there are other storm fronts coming through that same day, what to do if there's a tornado watch for your area. So they mainly hit in sparsely populated rural areas, but not always. Several years ago, I think it was 2009 or 2010, in late November or December of that year, it was unusually warm, and we had a tornado spawn up in northeast Baltimore. Raised the entire roof off a 3 or 4 story garden apartment building. Happened at 1 in the morning. There was no tornado watch or warning in effect. There was a severe thunderstorm warning that had been put out maybe 15, 20 minutes before this, but there was no sign of any rotation on any radar, and of course there wasn't any local news on at the time, and people were asleep. But all of a sudden, people who were laying in bed looking up at the roof one minute, or maybe the inside of their eyelids, all of a sudden they were looking up at the stars. Thankfully, again, knock on wood, there were nothing more serious than cuts and bruises in that incident. But it does show that they can happen in urban areas. They don't always happen in the spring and early fall. It can happen, late fall, early winter. They also say that they don't happen in mountainous areas. I don't have it on this particular presentation, but I can show you a picture from Frostburg out in mountainous sections of western Allegheny County that will show that an F4 tornado hit there in 1998. Destroyed several buildings. Again, fortunately, no one hurt. Sparsely populated, so it wasn't many buildings, but there were several houses in the area, very spread out, that were seriously damaged or destroyed by that tornado that Doesn't happen in mountainous areas. But some hit population centers, causing major damage, death, and injuries. Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Moore, Oklahoma, which is a suburb of Oklahoma City, so they can happen in populated areas. They are less likely to form and travel in hilly mountainous areas, and so that's why the Frostburg one was so unusual, and it didn't last very long. It touched down briefly, did its damage, and then dissipated because of the terrain, as opposed to southern Maryland, where actually twice over the last 100 years, La Plata has had serious tornado damage. Again, not frequent compared to the Midwest and other areas, but compared to eastern areas, very unusual for one community to get hit with two major F4, F5 level tornadoes, even though they were 100 years apart, but with some substantial loss of life each time. And it can and has created waterspouts in the Chesapeake Bay. There's often also been sites of waterspouts off the coast of Ocean City when some heavy thunderstorms have spawned them or maybe formed some rotation out over the ocean. They are nature's most violent storms, even though they're not as big and massive as a hurricane. They are much smaller area affected, but they can do intense amounts of damages. It's a rotating funnel-shaped cloud that goes from a thunder cloud down to the ground. The winds can reach 300 miles an hour. That's not sustained, but they can be that high. Damage path can be in excess of a mile wide, as much as 50 miles long. Now, again, 50 miles long around here is unusual. The last one that hit La Plata in 2000 actually started in Virginia, dissipated, came back in Maryland, went across much of southern Maryland, skipped over the bay, and actually did a little damage in Dorchester County. The path of that, I believe is about 38 miles. That's unusual for the East Coast, but that is a fairly flat area down in central Virginia and southern Maryland. Before a tornado, again, listen to that weather information. Tornado watch means that the National Weather Service has said that the conditions in the area that day, hot, humid, possible cold front coming in from the west, it lends itself to the formation of supercell thunderstorms, if you will. That's one of the terms they like to use, which can then turn into a tornado. And then if it's a tornado warning, then you know that there's one imminent within a few miles of your house, and that's when you need to take appropriate actions. Be alert to the changing conditions. Look for those appropriate storms. A dark, often greenish sky tint. My wife is from the Midwest, so she's very, very perceptive on those. Large hail, large, dark, low-lying clouds, particularly if there's any sort of rotation in them at all. And a loud roar similar to a freight train is how it's been described by many people. The tornado watch, again, the conditions are favorable. The tornado warning means it's been spotted and detected on weather radar, could be heading your way. And again, most likely local news broadcasts will cease. Soap operas, game shows, talk shows, whatever, and they'll break in and start immediately showing you all the weather maps and telling people within that path to take cover. During a tornado, if you're in a structure, go to a safe room, basement, cellar, or lowest building level. Okay, so if you don't have a basement, then go to your first floor. Stay as far away from windows as possible. Might mean a few people crowding into a powder room, but try and stay away from windows. Put as many walls as possible between you and the outside. Get under a sturdy table and use your arms to protect your head. Another thing you can do, couch cushions, heavy blankets. Pull them over the back of your head to protect your head from flying debris. Again, don't open windows. That's an old wives' tale. They say open windows, it will equalize the air pressure. Don't believe it. Keep the windows closed. If you're in a trailer or a mobile home, there's only two words: get out. Okay? There is no safe place in a mobile home or a trailer home. Okay? So if you live in, what they call a manufactured home or, mobile home, whatever, okay, you've got to find a way to get out, and you've got to find some other place to take shelter. If you're outside with no shelter, I always get a lot of trick questions on this. When Channel 45 calls me up, inevitably it's often around rush hour. They're up on TV Hill in Baltimore, and they're saying, we just saw the rush hour pictures on the JFX. Traffic's at a standstill. The JFX is elevated highway. What do you do? Well, you don't have any ideal situations there. If you're out on the road and you have and you're out on an open highway and there's open land around you and you can get out of your car and safely get into the field or whatever, do that. Only thing I would caution is if you get into a drainage ditch, Make sure that there's not heavy rain coming, because then you'll have another issue. You'll be in this ditch that's all of a sudden inundated with water. But if you can safely get out of the car, get to this area off the side of the highway, and get face down, and again, cover yourself with your hands or a jacket or whatever to keep your head and your back protected, do that. If you're on an elevated highway like the JFX or a section of the Beltway where there's retaining walls right next to the road, stay in your car. Just stay in your car. There's no guarantee the car won't be picked up, but just stay in your car, because you just don't really have any really good options at that point in time. Knock on wood, we've not had any serious issues with storms uplifting cars on highways. We did in College Park in a parking lot there, and a couple of students were killed back in 2001, but we've never had any serious issues. But the last tornado they had in Moore, Oklahoma a few years ago, it did hit one of the highways. I guess it wasn't even Moore. It was one of the other areas of Oklahoma City, and they're one of their main interstates there. There was traffic wall-to-wall there, and a couple of cars did get picked up, and there were some people injured. So I can't guarantee that it won't happen, but there's, people say, well, can you get under a bridge? No, because the ping-pong effect of stuff swirling around under the bridge is more dangerous than just staying in your car and hoping for the best. Okay, heat and drought. We do get some heat around here. Knock on wood, we've not had too much serious drought since the late 90s. We had, I think, either 98 or 99, we had some serious drought. I remember as a kid growing up in the 60s and early 70s, we had a lot more dry summers then than we do now. It's not nearly as bad now. But again, these are things to think about, particularly people who have some diseases, heart conditions, weight issues, diabetes, things like that. So some people have trouble with their bodies, keeping their body temperature under control. All right. Heat symptoms, heat illness can include heavy sweating, muscle cramps, weakness, dizziness, nausea, weak or rapid pulse. And so to avoid heat-related illnesses, okay, never leave pets, children, or infants inside a parked car. Every year we hear some stories where somebody went into work and forgot they had a kid in the car, or ran into the store for a few minutes and left Fluffy in the car. You just can't do it. Okay, leave the dog at home when you go to the store. I know dogs like to go out with their owners sometimes. Leave your pet at home if you have to go out in the summertime. Drink lots of fluids. Even after you don't feel thirsty, keep drinking fluids. And I mean primarily water, sports drinks, maybe juice of some sort. Sodas have caffeine in them, and that's a diuretic that pulls water out of your system. Alcohol, while a cold beer tastes certainly refreshing when you're very hot, it's not going to do anything to rehydrate you. So be very careful about the types of stuff that you drink. Okay? Avoid very cold beverages. I've never had that issue. Some people say it's a problem. Wear lightweight, light-colored clothing to try and reflect as much of the light heat as you can. Limit outdoor activities between 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. Wear sunscreen with a minimum of SPF 15. If you don't have air conditioning in your home, try and rest in shaded areas, or better yet, try and find, if you can't drive or don't have a car, try and find someone who can let you come to their house for a while if they have air conditioning, or can take you to a library or a senior center or a shopping mall or somewhere where you can get in some cool air for a while. And that brings up another point. If you are fortunate enough where your air conditioning is working, or you have air conditioning and you know people who don't, and it's in this situation, if you can, invite them into your home for a while. If you're lucky enough to have a car and you know people who don't, see if they want to take a trip to the library for a while. Not necessarily to read, just to cool off, or to go to the shopping mall and window shop for a while. Even if you don't have money to shop, at least you're out of the heat for a while. Okay? Some public health events. That's in the news a lot lately. We don't have Ebola up here, and knock on wood, it won't become a serious issue, but certainly for any of these kind of public health events. Influenza, whether it's regular seasonal flu, avian flu, the H1N1 we had a few years ago, biological events, and they could be terrorism related, SARS, which was in the news a few years ago, West Nile virus, which seems to rear its ugly head every few years, although mostly just with birds, other public health events, mumps, mad cow disease, etc. Okay, so prevention, limit the risk of exposure, vaccinate as you're comfortable with or as you think is needed. Take normal precautions, wash hands, Cover your mouth when coughing and sneezing. I've gotten in the habit of coughing like this into the crook of my arm. So if I don't get to a place to wash my hands before I have to shake someone's hand, I haven't spread whatever it is that's out there. Use insect repellents for West Nile disease. Family emergency, okay? So make sure you have for your plan, make sure you have information for all your family's members, their date of birth, their social security number, and important medical information. Try and keep these, again, I talked about those important documents before. Keep this information with those documents. Medical contacts for all your household members, your regular doctor, any specialist that you see, if you're doing physical therapy, any type of information like that. And also for your pets. Don't forget your vets and things like that for your pets. Out-of-state contact. If mom is at workplace A, dad's at workplace B, and the kids are at one or more different schools, and your neighborhood's been completely destroyed by a tornado while you're not in the neighborhood, the good news is you weren't in the neighborhood. The bad news is you don't have a neighborhood to go back to. So where are you going to meet? How are you going to get in touch with each other to let everybody know you're okay? Try and have an out-of-state relative or a friend of the family or whatnot, that you can give everybody their phone number, and if you're all in different locations when an event hits, you can all call that person and say, I'm safe and here's where I'm at. I'm safe and here's where I'm at. And then once you can get cell phone service back up and running, which sometimes takes a while, then you can figure out how to reunite. But at the very least, someone will be able to pass the word along that, yeah, all 4 people in the family are safe. They're all at different locations, but they're safe, they're sheltered, and now we got to figure out how to get back together. Again, meeting places, local, okay? If there's a fire drill, I know I've been told, Dale says that you started working on doing fire drills and having meeting locations here, similar, much smaller scale for your house. But again, if you can't get into your home, if it's something more than a fire, regionally, if you all live in the Woodlawn, Catonsville area, where in this area or where near this area would you be able to get together to meet? Your work information, your school information, and again, your insurance information. Disaster supply kit. You should have a 3-day supply of non-perishable foods that don't need refrigeration or cooking or a lot of water or lengthy preparation, because you're not going to have your microwave. You probably won't have your stove. You maybe, if it's a gas stove, you may get lucky, okay? So you're talking about ready-to-eat canned meats, okay? Spam never tasted so good if you don't have anything else. Peanut butter, jelly, trail mix, energy bars, canned vegetables. They're not real appetizing, but you can eat cold peas. It won't kill you. So just keep in mind things like that. Don't forget that there may be family members that have special needs as infants, or the elderly, or people with special diets or allergies. That peanut butter is great unless someone eating from it has a peanut allergy. So again, keep in mind those things. I may get to it on the next slide, but remember food and stuff for your pets. Water. Store water in plastic containers such as soft drink bottles, or buy 1-gallon containers of water. You don't have to keep buying the 1-gallon containers of water. Use them once and then refill them. Okay, or you can use old milk containers and wash them out real good, sanitize them real good, and then you can use them to store water for a few months. Again, 1 gallon of water per person per day for a 3-day period. That can be a little daunting, especially if you live in a small place, and especially if you have to evacuate. Who's going to lug all that water around? So those are things to consider, but that's what we recommend. First aid, some sterile adhesive bandages, scissors, tweezers, needles, moist towelettes, antiseptic, thermometer, petroleum jelly, cleansers or soap, aspirin, some sort of pain reliever, assorted sterile pads, antacid, laxative. You could probably think of some other things if you wear glasses, spare pair of glasses or a glass repair kit, things like that. I'm not going to read everything on here. You can go to a lot of websites. Ready.gov is FEMA's website. MEMA.maryland.gov is our website. You can Google Red Cross disaster. You can Google CDC disaster from within your own agency here. Excuse me. There are lots of sources to find information for what to have in these kits. Some sanitation items, toilet paper, soap, personal hygiene, etc. Change of clothing. If you have to evacuate, this is very important. Change of clothing, maybe some bedding. I would suggest if you have to evacuate, Use the shelter as a last resort if maybe it's only going to be an hour or two, or if you absolutely can't get to or afford to go anywhere else. But if you have Aunt Matilda who's out of harm's way and she has a spare bedroom, visit Aunt Matilda. She misses you, and you'd much rather sleep in her spare bedroom than in a shelter. You'd much rather sleep in a Motel 6 than a shelter, okay? Shelters are either a last resort for people who can't get anywhere else or for something that they anticipate to be a very short duration. Special items. Again, if you have babies, prescription medicine, pet information, things to keep your kids occupied. Nothing worse than having bored kids in a shelter, or a motel room for that matter. Been there, done that, traveling on vacation. Okay? And again, those important documents that we've talked about before. Vehicle. Have a small kit in your vehicle. Doesn't have to be as big as your home kit. Probably can't be as big as your home kit. Food, water, first aid supplies, flares, jumper cable, seasonal supplies. Again, winter storms, kitty litter. Keep some kitty litter or some sand in there to get some traction if you need it. Again, you can keep copies of some of your important documents on a flash drive. Keep it in your glove box or carry it around with you on your keychain. Work. Just curious, anybody here have a disaster supply kit in their office if you were forced to stay here for a few days? Okay, a couple hands went up. Very good. Okay. One of the lessons we learned from that blizzard or that winter snowstorm back in 2011, and in D.C., the federal agencies down there are now committed that if people can't get out of their workplace before the roads get bad, they will be allowed to shelter in place. They may not have a cafeteria open to feed them, but they'll allow people to shelter in place there until the roads are clear enough for people to get home. So think about what you may need at work. If you need to get out of your office quickly, what would you need to take home with you? But if you have to stay in your office for an extended period of time, active shooter, and let's say the shooter's not in your office, but you can't leave your area of the building, and you're stuck in there for a few hours until the police do that systematic room-by-room search that they have to do, you're going to get thirsty, you're going to get hungry, okay? So think about that. You may have to go to the bathroom, too. I can't solve that problem. I can't solve all problems, but do try and keep some food and some water or something handy by your desk if, God forbid, you would need to do that. Pet preparedness, we've talked a little bit about that. There's a couple of sites there. You can also go to the Humane Society or the SPCA's website. The problem is that their disaster pages, the URL would go off the page. So just Google their website or get to their website and Google disaster preparedness, and they'll take you to the pages that they have set up for that. Or you can use the two that are up here. Develop a buddy system. If you're away from home during the workday, see if there's somebody who works a different shift or a stay-at-home mom or somebody who's a good friend of yours who might be able to help take care of your pets if, God forbid, something happens while you're at work or not available. Talk to the vet about emergency planning. Make sure your vehicle is large enough to transport all your pets. Well, I'm out of luck. Even though I have a small SUV, we have 3 dogs, a rabbit, 2 turtles, and a snake. Okay? The snake's not too bad because we can put him in a smaller container than he's in. The rabbit's not too bad. The Jack Russell Terrier, although he's annoying and barks a lot, he's not too bad size-wise. But the Basset Hound, the Labrador, and their crates, that's going to be a problem. So I will admit, we're not prepared to be able to do that. I don't think they make a vehicle big enough for that. But again, a pet emergency supply kit, a lot of the same things that we would have for humans. ID tags, rabies tags, any sort of documentation for them should be with those important documents. A pet first aid kit. Maryland has gone mobile, so we have an app that you can download. It's called Maryland Prepares. You can get it at the Google store or whatever store sells the apps for your devices. There are a number of neat features on there. It will geolocate where you're at and push warnings out to you if there's a severe storm warning of some sort hitting the area where you're physically located at. You can set up a phone list on there, and then if your area's been hit by a tornado, let's say, you can push a button and all the people on that phone list will be notified that you're okay. You can tell them, I'm okay, I'll get in touch with you as soon as I can or something like that. But you don't have to go adding everybody's number or trying to punch in a whole bunch of names. You can hit one button and push out that notification to all your family and friends. Question? Did I see a hand up? Okay. Okay, very quickly about us, as mentioned before, we're on Camp Fredder. There's about 70 of us working there now. Actually, some of us are now working in Owings Mills. We were working out of some trailers attached to the back of the building. When that building was built in '99, it was designed for about 45 full-time employees. We have about 70 now. Again, a number of us were working in trailers. We found out that renting the trailers was more expensive than renting office space down the road in Owings Mills. So we're getting rid of the trailers, which are about 8 years old now anyway, and some of us are down in Owings Mills. But in Reisterstown, that's the State Emergency Operations Center. If you ever see Governor O'Malley on TV during a major disaster, that's where he is. I'm usually the one typing up the notes to tell him what to tell the public to do. The Maryland Joint Operations Center is part of that building. It's the first joint civilian military watch in the country. We have National Guard soldiers and airmen in there monitoring world and national events. And then we have our civilian emergency management professionals who are monitoring local police, fire, weather information, things like that. We have 3 directorates: the Preparedness Directorate, which I'm a part of, our Operations Directorate, and the Administrative Directorate that takes care of all the back office functions. So that's all I have for right now. I'll be happy to answer any questions about anything I said here or about anything I didn't say here. Be more than happy to hear from anyone. Okay, everybody go run out and get your kits and whatnot? Oh, okay.
Check. Do we have any questions on the phone for Ed? All right, Ed, I guess that's it.
That means I did a real good job and told everybody everything. Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
All right, Charlie, can you switch them for us? Ed, again, thanks for coming.
Oh, glad to do it.
A lot of really good information there.
Thank you.
Would you put the clicker in? Okay. Oh. All right, folks, we're going to finish up our OEO Town Hall meeting. Again, thank you for coming. We will make Ed's presentation available on our website, so if you wanted to look at that. I believe Charlie's also videoed this, and we're going to see if we can have that posted somewhere as well. All right. And Charlie's fast today. All right, AED CPR training. I had no idea that had flashing lights. It didn't have it when I first brought it up. Where's my 508 person? They're going to be very mad. I apologize. All right, AED CPR training. Times, dates will be coming soon. We realized that we ran a little bit low on classes last year, and we're going to go ahead and move forward on that. Elias, you got some fire drills?
Yeah, here's our fire drill schedule. As all of you know, that we began our this year announcing the date and time. That was kind of our crawl, walk, run, because we put some new procedures in place. Everybody's done outstanding. So as you see here, we no longer announce the date, the time. We give you the date. So it's kind of like our crawl, walk, run. You guys are walking, but you guys are doing so good that even July 24th in Ambassador Road experienced an actual event. And in our after-action report, we received word that the procedures went smoother than a drill. So that's exactly what we want, is for it to go smoother in the real deal. But here's our times. It'll be available in the broadcast. It'll be available on digital signage and on our website.
Right, and as you notice, it says tentative. So these could be subject to change. If you write the dates down now, please check your broadcast when it comes out. But these are our tentative dates. As you notice, the time isn't on here as before. We're only going to announce the date. And there's my favorite slide again. Is that all we got? There we go. Shelter in place. You got shelter in place, Elias? You got this.
Sure, yeah.
There you go.
Well, we got our shelter in places coming up. We did our outline building so far, and we're going to bring it right here on 7500 Security Boulevard, October 16th, 23rd, and November 20th. You'll see on digital signage, we actually have some instructions going out on what to do. We've identified all our shelter-in-place locations. They are available on our website. And we have example coming up you'll see in a minute that shows you exactly where you go. But just think, it's the centermost part of the building away from windows. There you go. And as you can see here, the shaded areas are the areas that we have identified as good shelter-in-place areas. You won't hear an alarm. You'll hear a PA announcement that'll say something like this. It'll say, "Attention CMS, at this time there's been a tornado sighted in the Woodlawn area. Please report to your designated shelter." It'll repeat and repeat. That time, please just stop what you're doing and go ahead and go for shelter.
Right, and for our OEO volunteers, we're really going to rely on you to make sure that people aren't looking out the window to see if they can see a tornado coming down Lord Baltimore Drive or wherever you happen to be. We want you to move people away from windows to the centermost part of the building. There will be a link that you'll be able to see all the shelter-in-place areas. And please remember, when you shelter in place at the nearest area. You don't travel through the building. You don't come from 7111 to here if you hear shelter in place. You shelter in place where you're at. And think of the centermost part of the building away from windows. That's where we want you to be. All right, coming up, we have the OEO module. Isn't that a scary-looking person in our picture here behind me? Yeah, poor Elias. The OEO module has been our magical module, and the managers have been asked to enter their information along with our OEO members. So if you're an OEO member or manager and you have not yet entered this, Miss Amy Keaty, to your right, is going to be sitting out here with her computer. If you have your HSPD-12 credential, you can do it today. It should only take how long, Amy? 2 minutes. 2 minutes. All right, so we want you to enter your information in that. That way we're going to better manage the OEO. We're going to know where people are in the building. We're going to have our employees with disabilities tied to their monitors. So the day before the drill, we don't realize that this monitor's left or this person is no longer here. Once this credential is turned in to the badging office and is deactivated, we will get an email if it's an OEO member, and then we will see if they need to be replaced or how can we fill their position that they held. With that, Ed had a really good presentation on how to prepare. Folks, this is the time to prepare. And every training session I provide, I tell you the fire drill makes 2 sounds, right? You let me hear it. It's the sound you hear now and the sound you hear when it goes off. So does disasters. So does Ed on the news going, stay inside, prepare, don't leave. Today is the day you need to start preparing. Even if you can just get a couple gallons of water. He mentioned flooding is a big deal in this area. Fire trucks don't float, so be very careful. If a fire truck cannot get to you, a fire truck cannot save you. So be careful with the candles and everything else that Mr. McDonough had mentioned. So with that, OEO people, we have any questions? Any questions from the floor? Yes, sir. Okay, for on the phone, someone in the audience asked, we have fire drills and shelter-in-place drills. Will we be experiencing any other type drills? And the question is yes. We are going to have our first earthquake exercise on October 17th at 10:17 a.m. at the Lord Baltimore Drive building, the 2520 Lord Baltimore Drive building. It'll be our first shelter-in-place, our first earthquake exercise. And what do we do for an earthquake, folks? We stop, cover, and hold. So we've been out there. We've trained Ben Cohen's staff and the small contingent of contractors they have out there, and they are prepared. So at 10:17, if you're in Lord Baltimore Drive, you'll be on the floor under your desk. For those folks that are not able to drop, cover, and hold, we will work with each one on a person-to-person basis on how can they prepare themselves. People might be able to get under their desk. Some people may not. So we're going to work with our folks that may not be able to accomplish that. All right. Any other questions? Yeah.
When will my expired OEO badge be reissued?
Oh, the OEO badge. Who remembers the OEO badge? Right? For you folks on the phone, there's 10 people raising their hands. We used to issue an OEO badge through the Division of Critical Infrastructure Protection. However, we didn't really even know who was in the OEO. But with our module, we're going to know. So if you've completed the module and your name's in there, come January 1st, we're going to start reissuing the OEO badge. Now, the OEO badge says you're a member of the OEO. As you're clearing the floor, if somebody's asking, what are you doing? Why are you still in here? Why aren't you getting out? You say, I have an OEO duty, and here is my credential. All right? So if you filled out your application in the OEO module, the portal, you will be provided an OEO badge. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I notice when I'm out in the parking lot, I see a lot of different vests during fire drills, red, green, neon, orange, and yellow. I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on those.
Right. Thank you for that question. The vest that we have two distinct vests that you'll see in the parking lot that you should see. We have the OEO floor warden vest, which is green, as everybody's semi familiar with. These are our volunteers. These are not our managers. These are our, as Elias says, our hard chargers, our folks that are clearing the building, getting people out. This is the vest you should have for that. Our managers are going to have an assembly area coordinator vest on. This is who you would report to once you're outside. You report to your manager will report to that. Anyone that has an older type vest needs to contact us. I know a few of you already have. As soon as money cuts loose, we're going to purchase some new vests that will match the green one. But if you haven't put your information in the OEO module and you don't have a new vest, by first of the year, come spring fire drills, we're going to be taking your old vest as you walk in the building. So we need to get folks that haven't been to training in some time to give back their old vest and get them into training and get their new vest. We don't want to discourage anyone from joining our OEO volunteer. However, you need to come to training. For you folks out there, you need to come to training. Yes, sir, Mr. Williams.
Who do I report to if I report outside during an evacuation? Who do I report to if I go outside for an evacuation and my supervisor's not there?
That's a very good question. If you go outside and your supervisor is not there to take roll, he or she hopefully has a designated backup. However, if they don't have a designated backup and your assembly area is number 26, you would go to the assembly area coordinator at 26 and say, assembly area coordinator, my director isn't in today, however, I am here. And it would be nice if you could get with your other coworkers prior to doing that so you could say, we can't find this person. So that would be fantastic. Any other questions? Yes, Ms. Danita.
What if I don't know who my floor warden is? How do I find that information?
That's very good. If you don't know who your floor warden is, you simply email occupant emergency. And now with our new module that everyone's going to have their information in today, thanks to Miss Amy again, what you'll do is we can search the database, the module, and we can tell you what floor warden is in what zone. And then if you call us and you don't know who your floor warden is and we can't find one for that area, then we know that we have an issue there. Right now, once everyone's had their information in, we can then process that information to identify any gaps that we might have. All right. Any other questions about our drills, exercise, additional training?
Any questions on the phone?
Yeah, this is Jeff Holiday over in CPI. I'm on the OEO website, and I'm looking for the link that allows me to register for that module. On that module.
Yes, the link to that is, Amy's, I'm going to let you say it. We can email this out. We've emailed it out a couple times, but Amy's going to read you the link, Mr. Holiday.
Okay.
It is https://pam.cms.local.
Okay. Thank you.
PAM. We'll enter you because you're a contractor. We'll take care of you.
Who's the contractor?
No, there's someone else in the room. I apologize, Mr. Holiday. Yeah, you're good. No, not you, Mr. Holiday. One of our hard-charging contractors is here.
Hoorah.
All right. Any other questions? Folks, with that, unless you're in Lord Baltimore Drive on October 17th, I will see you in April.
If they want to sign up for the module.
Oh, if you have to sign up for the module. And if you haven't signed in, please sign out because we will go in the module and credit you all for coming to training today. All right? For you folks on the telephone, if you could email occupant emergency and in the subject line just type in, I attended the town hall, we will credit you. All right? Again, thank you all much. Prepare yourselves, prepare your families, prepare your loved ones, and don't forget your pets. Thank you.
Thank you.